The black sedan did not belong on Maple Row. Everyone on that street knew it the instant it turned the corner. Too clean, too quiet, too deliberate in the way it glided past the cracked asphalt and the chain-link fences and parked, without hesitation, directly in front of a narrow two-story house. Curtains shifted in windows. Old Mr. Garfield stopped sweeping his porch mid-stroke. Even the pigeons on the telephone wire went still, as though they, too, sensed that something long overdue had finally arrived. Dorian Price stood in his doorway with a dish towel still in his hand. He was a broad-shouldered man whose face carried the specific kind of tiredness that sleep cannot fix. Behind him, his 8-year-old daughter, Marin, pressed herself against his back and peered around his arm with wide, unguarded eyes. The woman who stepped out of the sedan wore a white blazer. No lawyers flanked her. No clipboard. No contracts visible in her hands. She walked up the cracked front path with the steady, measured pace of someone who had rehearsed this moment 100 times and was still terrified. She stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. She looked up at Dorian. "My name is Celeste Ror," she said. "My father has died, but I came to pay his debt." The street went completely silent. Dorian did not move. He already knew that name. He had spent 6 years trying to forget it. What happened over the next few weeks would change both of their lives forever. Before we begin, if you believe kindness, humility, and second chances can change the world, please take a moment to like this video, comment where you're watching from, share this story with someone who needs inspiration today, and subscribe to the Aura Fables for more unforgettable stories. To understand what Celeste Ror's arrival meant, you have to understand what Dorian Price had become, and more importantly, what he had been before the world decided he was expendable. Dorian was 42 years old and lived with his daughter in the Brookmere neighborhood on the outer edge of the city, the kind of neighborhood where the grocery stores still had bulletproof glass at the registers and the school buses ran late every single morning without apology. The house on Maple Row was narrow and worn at the edges, but it was clean. Dorian made sure of that. The floors were swept. The dishes were washed. Marin's drawings were taped in careful rows along the hallway wall. Small dignities. The kind a man holds onto when larger ones have been taken from him. 6 years earlier, Dorian had been a senior safety supervisor on the East Vale Bridge project, one of the largest infrastructure contracts the city had awarded in a decade. He was meticulous, credentialed, deeply respected by the crews beneath him. He had the kind of open, easy face that lit up when talking about load calculations and structural integrity and made younger workers feel like they could ask him anything. He had a future that matched his ability. Then, he found the problem. During a routine walkthrough one early morning before the crews arrived, Dorian identified stress fractures in 3 load-bearing columns of the secondary support structure. Diagonal lines in the lower third, subtle enough to fool an untrained eye, unmistakable to his. He had seen that exact pattern on a job site in Baltimore years before. He knew precisely what it meant. He went directly to the site trailer and wrote a 4-page formal warning report, photographs attached, and submitted it through the project management system. He sent a physical copy to the Regional Safety Board by certified mail. He kept a copy at home because he had learned early in his career that paperwork had a way of disappearing when it became inconvenient to the people at the top. The project manager told him 2 days later that the columns had been reviewed internally and were within acceptable tolerance. No halt would be ordered. The timeline would continue. Dorian pushed back. He escalated. He requested the internal review documents. He was told they were proprietary. He contacted the regional director. His calls were not returned. 2 weeks later, a section of scaffolding on the eastern span collapsed during a shift change. 4 workers were injured. When the investigation concluded, Dorian's warning report had vanished from every official file. In its place was a narrative that named him, the safety supervisor, as the individual responsible for failing to catch warning signs any competent professional should have identified. He was terminated the following Monday. Within 6 months, his name had circulated through every major contractor network in the region. His certifications were suspended pending review. The review never concluded. It simply remained open, like a wound no one intended to close. The timing was catastrophic in ways that reached far beyond his career. His wife, Alina, had been in the middle of treatment for an aggressive autoimmune condition when he lost his job and, with it, their health insurance. Dorian sold the car. He took roofing jobs, night shifts at a warehouse, anything that paid. He borrowed from his brother until his brother had nothing left. He did everything a man could do, and it still was not enough. Alina died 14 months after his termination, in a hospital room that smelled of industrial cleaner, with Dorian holding her hand and Marin asleep in a chair in the corner, too young to understand and old enough to remember. After that, Dorian stopped expecting anything from the world except the chance to raise his daughter without adding to the damage she had already survived. That was the man standing in the doorway when Celeste Ror stepped out of her black sedan. Celeste Ror was 34 years old when her father, Victor Ror, founder of Ror Meridian, a construction and development conglomerate valued at nearly $2 billion, died of a stroke 8 weeks before she arrived on Maple Row. Powerful men sometimes die that way, quickly, as though their bodies finally object to carrying the weight of everything they refuse to put down. Victor left behind a company, a leather chair at the head of a boardroom table, and a locked steel safe hidden behind a false panel in his home office. Celeste discovered it only when the state attorneys came to inventory the property. Inside, beneath a stack of bond certificates and a photograph of Victor shaking hands with the mayor, was a thick manila folder, rubber-banded, labeled in her father's own handwriting with a single word: Eastvale. Celeste read everything in that folder in one sitting, on the floor of her father's office, still wearing the black dress from his funeral reception. By the time she finished, the caterers had gone home. The house was completely dark around her. The folder contained Dorian Price's original warning report, the one that had never appeared in the official investigation. It contained an independent structural assessment commissioned by a city engineer 2 weeks before the collapse, which confirmed every concern Dorian had raised and recommended an immediate construction halt. And it contained a handwritten memo from Victor Ror to the project director, dated 3 days before the scaffolding came down, that read, "Keep the timeline. Adjust documentation after the fact if necessary. I'll manage the board." 3 sentences, written in her father's hand, signed with his initials. Celeste spent the following 2 weeks trying to find a version of what she had read that did not mean what it clearly meant. She spoke to no one. She hired a private document examiner to verify the memo's authenticity. She cross-referenced dates and pulled archived city records. She requested copies of the investigation transcript under her name as incoming CEO. Everything confirmed the same thing. Dorian Price had done his job correctly. He had identified the problem, reported it through every proper channel available to him, and been systematically erased from the record to protect the company's timeline and its public standing. Victor Ror had read the warning. Victor Ror had chosen to bury it. Inside the company, meanwhile, the board had grown watchful. Chief Legal Officer Warren Keane, 61 years old, precise, and completely without sentiment about anything that threatened the organization's legal standing, had become aware through his own sources that Celeste had been making inquiries. He requested an emergency meeting and delivered his position without preamble. The East Vale matter was closed, he told her. Legally closed, formally closed, with full regulatory sign-off. If she reopened it, she would be creating a liability the company could not absorb. The board would move to remove her before they allowed that to happen. He told her this was both legal counsel and a courtesy, so that she understood exactly what she was walking into. After he left, Celeste sat alone in the glass-walled conference room on the 34th floor and looked out at the city below. Somewhere in that city, Dorian Price was making dinner for his daughter in a house that was clean despite everything that had tried to make it otherwise. She picked up her phone. Celeste came to Maple Row the next afternoon. Then she came back. And again after that. She always came alone. Always in the late afternoon when Marin was home from school. Always without paperwork or prepared proposals. She sat on the lower porch step near the path, while Dorian sat at the top with his back against the post. Marin did her homework between them, occasionally inserting herself into the conversation with questions that were too precise for an 8-year-old. Questions Dorian answered with the careful honesty of a man who had decided his daughter deserved the truth in age-appropriate portions. The neighborhood watched. Leon Vance, who had run the corner grocery on Maple Row for 23 years, caught Dorian at the register one afternoon and spoke quietly, without softening anything. He had seen this before, he said, different car, different suit, same story. They came in with apologies and left with signatures. 2 years later, the whole block was rezoned, and everyone was gone. Dorian had thought the same thing. What made Celeste difficult to dismiss was not her sincerity. Sincerity was easy to perform. It was the specificity of what she knew. Details that existed in no public record. Details that could only have come from documents that had been buried. Then came the evening she played him the recording. Victor Ror had recorded some of his calls. The file on the USB drive was dated 4 days before the scaffolding collapse. Victor's voice came through the speaker on the porch, low, measured, the voice of a man accustomed to being listened to. He was speaking to the project manager. He told him to keep the crews on schedule. He said the column assessment had been handled. When the project manager mentioned that the safety supervisor had escalated his concerns to the regional board, Victor said, "That's been managed. If anything happens on site, we document it as an equipment failure. The supervisor's report doesn't exist officially, so it can't be cited." The street was completely silent. Dorian sat motionless. He did not cry. He did not raise his voice. He looked at the street light at the end of the path, then at his hands, then at the small speaker sitting between them on the step. "He heard me," Dorian said, finally. His voice was very quiet. He read the report. He knew exactly what I had found. And he buried it anyway. "Yes," Celeste said. "And 4 days later, 4 men got hurt." "Yes." It took Dorian 3 days. He went to work, picked Marin up from school, made dinner, helped with homework, and sat with the full weight of what he had heard. On the 3rd morning, he called Celeste. He said 4 words, "Let's do it right." They held a press conference at a downtown hotel, neutral ground, no corporate branding. 14 journalists attended. Several television cameras lined the back wall. Dorian arrived with Marin and sat against the wall near the door. Celeste stood at the front of the room without notes and spoke for 22 minutes. She described finding the safe, reading the folder, the memo in her father's handwriting, the independent structural assessment, the chain of internal emails between Victor Ror and Warren Keane about managing the investigation. Then she pressed play, and Victor Ror's voice filled the room, and the room went absolutely still. She presented Dorian's original warning report, the city engineer's suppressed assessment, and the authenticated audio file as formal evidence. She stated clearly, without legal hedging, that Dorian Price had done his job, that he had been deliberately erased from the official record, that the resulting investigation had been built on a falsified foundation. She did not say mistakes. She did not say oversights. She said, "My father made a choice. It was a wrong choice, made with full awareness of its consequences for another person and his family. I am here because that choice has to be named for what it was." When a journalist asked if Dorian wished to make a statement, he rose from the back row. He walked slowly to the front of the room, and Marin watched him from her seat against the wall, her hands folded in her lap, her eyes wide and steady. He stood beside Celeste and looked out at the cameras and the recording devices and the rows of faces pointed at him. And for the first time in 6 years, the ground beneath him felt level. "I did my job," he said. "I identified a problem. I documented it. I reported it through every proper channel available to me. What happened after that was not my failure. I spent 6 years carrying a name that did not belong to me. Today, I just want the record to reflect what actually happened." He paused. "I'm not here for sympathy. I'm here because my daughter is sitting in the back of this room, and I want her to know that the truth is worth saying out loud, even when it costs something." He walked back to his seat. Marin looked up at him. She did not say a word. She reached over and placed her small hand on top of his and left it there. In the corner grocery on Maple Row, Leon Vance stood in front of the small television above the register and watched the press conference feed on the local news. When Dorian finished speaking, Leon reached up and turned the volume higher so that every person in that store could hear the man he had doubted stand up and tell the truth. The response was not immediate, and it was not clean. Ror Meridian issued statements. Warren Keane appeared on a business news segment and used the word context 17 times in 8 minutes. The board voted to place Celeste on administrative leave, but the documents were already public. The audio file had already been shared, downloaded, and verified by 3 independent forensic audio firms within 48 hours, each confirming its authenticity. 2 former Ror Meridian employees came forward with their own accounts. A regional investigative journalist obtained the certified mail receipt showing Dorian's original report had been delivered to the safety board and obtained the internal memo instructing staff to log it as undeliverable. A state oversight committee opened an independent review. Warren Keane retained personal legal counsel. 2 board members quietly resigned. 6 weeks after the press conference, Dorian's professional record was formally corrected by the state licensing authority. His certifications were reinstated with a written acknowledgement that the original suspension had been based on falsified documentation. The collections notice threatening a lien on his home was voided. No payment was ever required. Celeste resigned from Ror Meridian 3 months later and used a portion of her personal assets to establish the East Vale Labor Trust, a fund for workers displaced or harmed by Ror Meridian projects across the preceding decade. She named it after the bridge that had started everything, because she believed the place where something goes wrong should be remembered, not erased. 4 months after the press conference, Dorian accepted a position as a senior safety consultant at a firm that had followed the story and reached out through a mutual contact. Their offer came with a handwritten note that read, "We looked at your original report. You were right. We'd like someone like you on our team." He accepted. On a Saturday morning in early spring, at the dedication of a new community recreation center in Eastbrook, 2 miles from Maple Row, Marin Price stood outside in her yellow jacket, arms crossed the way she had seen her father stand 100 times on a job site, and conducted her own thorough inspection of the building's exterior. Then she walked back to where Dorian and Celeste were standing and looked up at both of them. "Is the debt paid now?" she asked. Dorian looked at Celeste. Celeste looked at Marin. "Not entirely," Dorian said. "Some things can't be fully paid, but we're not carrying it for someone else anymore." Marin considered this with the full seriousness she brought to most things. Then she nodded, apparently satisfied, and ran toward the entrance to investigate the interior. Some debts cannot be settled with money. They can only be paid with truth. And truth, when it has been long overdue, costs something real from everyone who is willing to touch it. Dorian Price did not win because someone finally felt guilty. He prevailed because one person chose courage over comfort, and he chose the same. That is what this story is really about. Not the powerful woman who came to apologize, but 2 ordinary people who decided that silence, in the end, was a price neither of them could keep paying. Every person you pass carries battles you cannot see written on their face. The quiet worker, the man in the worn jacket, the father who sweeps his porch with steady, unhurried hands. Behind those ordinary surfaces live histories of sacrifice, competence, and integrity that the world sometimes buries, but cannot extinguish. True greatness is never measured by a title or a corner office. It is measured by what a person does when the cost of honesty is real and the outcome is uncertain. By whether they tell the truth not because it is safe, but because their child is watching. If this story stayed with you, share it with someone who needs to hear it today. Subscribe to the Aura Fables. There are more stories like this one waiting for you here, and every single one of them is worth your time.